you everybody so much for being here tonight. This is just the greatest pleasure. I'm so thrilled to be sitting across from the Palmer Luckey. Thank you for allowing us this evening and for being so generous and opening up your home. I guess we'll get started. For anybody who doesn't know your background, a little bit of your family, your upbringing, I'd love to hear that, and maybe a little bit of what about it set you on your path.
Okay. Boy, that last one is tough. I mean, that's psychoanalysis. That's not my job. Most people know me for starting a company called Oculus VR, which I started when I was 19 years old, living in a camper trailer. I started that company, figured out how to make virtual reality headsets better, cheaper, and faster than anyone else. Sold that company to Facebook for a few $1 billion and moved it to Silicon Valley for a few years, and then got fired by Zuckerberg. And now I work in the national security space, and I'm actually having even more fun. But I guess before that, working backwards, I worked in a University of Southern California research lab that was working on an Army program called BraveMind, which was treating veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder using virtual reality exposure therapy. I was not by any means a architect of BraveMind or even really doing much important work there, but it was my first exposure to kind of doing DoD-related work and also getting to work in the virtual reality industry. And then I guess before that, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was a car salesman. There was actually one time a media article that said, described him as a traveling used car salesman, which I couldn't even figure out what a traveling used car salesman would do. So that was a real media invention, a job I've never even heard of. I had three siblings, all sisters, all younger.
Okay.
So I don't know. There's all kinds of theories about age in relation to your other siblings and whether or not it helps you or hinders you in your career. And I haven't figured that out figured that one out yet. But I was also homeschooled and enrolled in college when I was 15 years old. And I got 3 years through Cal State Long Beach, and then I decided to drop out to start Oculus. My parents were pretty unhappy about that. So they told me I could not live in the house anymore since I was not going to school anymore. Pretty reasonable, I think. But Oculus ended up being the right choice. I felt like I had an opportunity. I felt like I could go back to school anytime. What I told people is I never dropped out of school. I just took a break from school because school will always be there. If some cataclysmic event occurred such that school were no longer even an option, then things are so bad in the United States that I don't need to be worrying about my lack of a degree. To this day, I'm not actually a college dropout. I'm just taking a break. And who knows? Maybe I will return one day.
Well,
but so far I'm having a good time. Yeah, but now I'm working in the national security space, building autonomous systems for a variety of DoD customers and allied partners.
Wow. Okay, so I hope everybody got that. That was a quick overview and really impressive, really incredible.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to maybe dig a little deeper into, and it was sort of dovetails into my next question, which is entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur's journey. You speak about deciding to drop out of school. You're 19. You want to start this company.
Yep.
The guts and maybe the gumption that takes.
Nothing. I think it's hugely overstated, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Everyone talks about how scary it is to start a company, but it really depends on where you are in your life. If you are someone with a family and with kids and with a stable job, then that totally makes sense. What I don't buy, and I always push back on this, is this idea that starting a company as a recent college graduate or someone taking a break from college is some kind of crazy, incredible sacrifice. Because I have people like, oh, it was so scary. I had to be so brave. It's like, no, you didn't. You don't have any family to take care of. You don't have a mortgage. You don't even have a career. You have nothing. So for me, I was working a minimum wage job and wasting my time to having Oculus. So for me, it wasn't hard to make that decision. I guess dropping out of school maybe, but if you can get your head past that, then it's actually pretty easy. So usually what I tell people is like, if you're going to start a company, especially for younger people, realize the stakes are lower when you're young than they will ever be. That's true. Unless you get to be old and also you've never had a career and you don't have a family and you have nothing better to do. In which case, you've probably got other issues to deal with. Anyway, I make that point mostly because I don't think it actually takes that much bravery when you're young to start a company, and I think more people should do that and recognize that really they're a coward for not.
Oh, I like that, flipping the script. Okay.
Ba-boom.
Yeah, there it is. But you mentioned earlier a camper. So
Yeah.
is there, I mean, you don't have to have bravery, but you have to have the willingness to live in a camper. Is that something that...
I actually sold the camper because I ran out of money, and then I lived in a motel that has since been condemned.
Okay.
So that was, I've lived there with my friend Chris. I called him up and said, Chris, I'm starting this company. And Chris is one of those incredible friends that everyone needs in their life, and a lot of people do not have, where they trust you quite a bit. And I called and said, what are you doing? What are you doing in the next couple months? He said, oh, I'm starting school. I said, no, you're not. You're coming to work for me instead. And he said, okay. And so that was on a Saturday. And then on Monday, I picked him up in my minivan, and he packed all his stuff into the car, and we drove away. And his mom was very surprised. And that was how Oculus started in the really early days. It was just me and Chris.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. So it sounds like maybe bravery is overrated, but some level of scrappiness.
Oh, you have to be scrappy, sure, and I mean,
Yeah.
you have to know how to make a dollar go far. But yeah, I don't think it takes a lot of bravery for someone with nothing to lose to start a company. You have nowhere to go but up, and nothing to waste but time.
All right, fair enough.
And when you're working minimum wage, your time is not worth very much.
So you start this company, you're 19 with your friend Chris.
Yep.
And you go into now having negotiations with somebody like Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, this is sort of the dream and the pinnacle, but you're 23 when you sold, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know when negotiations started.
No. So no, it was incredibly wild. The timeline was that I was 21 when I sold the company.
Wow.
So I was 19 when I formally started Oculus. I'd been working on virtual reality for years at that point as a hobby.
Okay.
So I started working on VR when I was 15 or 16. Started Oculus formally when I was 19 because I realized that I could do real-time pre-distortion on a graphics card in real time hundreds of times per second in a way that made it where I could use much cheaper lenses and still have the headset be much lighter and much wider field of view than anything out there. And that was kind of one of the key innovations that I think figuring out how to do that was the reason that Oculus was possible.
Wow.
But there were a whole bunch of other small innovations that we came up with along the way. I hired a really good team of people. One of the things I loved about working in virtual reality is that nobody had any good reason to do it. And the reason that that's great is because in so many businesses, you get people who are there because you can make a good paycheck. Like, for all the lawyers in the room, I'm sorry about this, but there's people, this is crazy, you won't believe me. There's people who are lawyers, not necessarily because they've always had a passion for law. And I think there's people who work on Wall Street. It's not because they necessarily have a passion for running hedge funds. It's because those are places where you can make a really good living. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of prestige. You can build a good lifestyle business. You can often retire early. All valid goals. Financial independence is great. The VR industry, by comparison, had never had a successful company in history. Every VR company in history had been a total failure. And there were a lot in the 80s and 90s, none in the early 2000s really, because it was such a dead idea. And so here we are in 2011, 2012. Everyone who worked for me was someone who was working on VR because they wanted to work on VR. Nobody was working on me because they thought they were going to retire early on it. Nobody was working for me because they thought it was prestigious or because they were going to make a lot of money. In a way, we were a band of misfits. Today, we call ourselves the true believers. It was all the people who worked at Oculus and on VR before Facebook bought our company for billions and kind of proved that this market was going to be going somewhere. And so, I mean, those were really cool days to work with a bunch of true believers who just loved virtual reality, loved the technology, loved what we were doing. And we didn't think we were going to make as much money as we did, as fast as we did. But we really believed that virtual reality was an important technology to work on, whether we succeeded in our particular iteration or not.
Wow, true believers.
True believers, capital T, capital B. And I still talk with all the true believers today. And I think what's interesting is all those true believers, they were the people who, when the going got tough, even later, so after we had lots of money to work with, those were the guys who would still be in the office at midnight. They'd be the ones who were working 7 days a week because they were the ones that were there because they believed in VR, not because they were there for a paycheck. And like to be honest, like I hired people who were there and they saw later, and they saw it as just a stepping stone for their career. It was they'd come in, do it for a few years, move on to the next thing. And I'd say none of those people are still working in VR. They've all moved on to some. Hey, one of them actually is working on Wall Street. So I mean, it's really interesting to look at that in hindsight, and how privileged I was to work with a group of people like that. And now I get to do it again. Like my new company in the defense space, we have a lot of true believers who are there for similar reasons. The only difference is that everyone is very convinced that I'm going to make them money because I'm very, very good at making money, and everyone thinks I'm going to do it again for them. So. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And that was actually going to be my next question. So you build Oculus and you've got this like the passionate people, the true believers, and you've got this level of scrappiness.
Yep.
And so it's wildly successful. How do you approach your next venture with everything you've learned? What are you applying? What are you bringing with you? And how does that second one go?
So I decided to start my second company in a totally different way than I started the first.
Okay.
At Oculus, it was a hobby, and I liked doing it, and I had no expectations of making money. But once you've had a measure of success, at least for me, you get addicted to it and you want to win. Also, just like I said, I was fired from my last job. So I have a chip on my shoulder and I'm bitter and angry about it. And so I have to prove to everyone that I'm better. And if I were to take a job where I would just go do something that was fun, but it wasn't particularly successful, then everyone would think that I'm a loser. And I don't want people to think I'm a loser. So for better or for worse, I was kind of forced in my next move. I said, okay, I have to do something that proves that they shouldn't have fired me, that I am smart, and that I'm not a one-hit wonder. Because being a one-hit wonder would be so depressing. If I had done Oculus and then failed in my next company and then failed again, I would be in a very mentally bad place. Oh. But instead, I'm doing pretty good. So I guess the difference here is on my second company, I didn't approach it as like, oh, let's just see what happens. I'll just do what I like doing and maybe it'll be fun. I have a lot of hobbies. There's lots of things that I like doing. I collect erotic anime figurines, but I didn't start an erotic anime figurine dealership because you can't make money doing that. And so I said, okay, there's kind of three things I think I can make money doing. And there were three areas I thought about starting a company in. One was working in the national security space. I thought, okay, cost plus contracting is a broken contract structure. It leads to massive cost overruns. Everyone has the wrong incentives. I think that I could start a company that does a lot of these things that companies like Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop are bad at doing, that I'm good at doing, and that I can hire people who are good at doing those things. The other was I considered starting a nonprofit private prison company that could outcompete all of the publicly traded private prison companies. I used to believe that you could get, and people may disagree with me, I think private prisons are very bad. I think they lead to terrible outcomes. They're a lobbying machine where all the money that is generated largely goes back into lobbying government officials for stricter sentences on the people who are the cheapest to incarcerate. So not the terrorists, not the murderers, it's the non-violent offenders. It's the victimless crime criminals. Those are the ones that public prison or private prisons want to house because they're not going to kill people, they're not going to cause you too much fuss. And that's how you end up with a lot of these mandatory minimum sentencing laws for crimes that don't matter, in my opinion. So at first I thought you could just get rid of this by lobbying. And then I realized that that's not possible because there's so much money in it. So I said, okay, I'll just start a nonprofit private prison company. And I'll just make a nonprofit prison company and I'll have a different model. I'll say, hey, I'll incarcerate your people in my private prison, except I don't get paid anything until they've been out of prison for 5 years without going back. And if they go back, I don't get paid. It means that I'm taking on the risk, and it means my incentives are going to be very aligned with, getting people out of prison and not having them come back. Whereas current prisons is the opposite. I decided against that because I realized that it was not actually a skill set that I had. I'm a technology guy, and as much as I thought this was going to be a very interesting thing to do, and I would like to do it someday on some time scale, the legal issues with doing this state by state are very, very tough. A lot of these prisons are also, they do these multi-decade long contracts. And so it's like, oh, I want to do this in California. Well, I have to wait at least 7 years for the next opening. And then it's like 4 more years till the next one. It's like, okay, so this is like a 30-year bet before I can do anything.
Yeah.
And then the last one was petroleum-based food products. I think the only way to solve obesity in America is to allow anybody to eat as much as they want of anything with no self-control or changes to their physical activity whatsoever. It has to be the holy grail. Or we're all just going to keep dying of obesity and related problems. And so if you're a food scientist, you generally make things out of foodstuffs, and I think that's a big mistake. If you're a chemical engineer, material engineer, and you want to make something with a certain texture, a certain feel, a certain property, you start with long-chain hydrocarbons, oil. It is the perfect building block for everything. You can build tires, glues, gels, you can build anything out of it. So if you're going to try to make a fake burger that tastes like a fake burger and feels like a real burger, why would you start with plants? You wouldn't build tires out of plants. You wouldn't build gels out of plants. You wouldn't build rubber out of plants. So why would you try to make something that has many of those same properties out of plants? Because plants suck. So if you could make synthetic foods out of petroleum derivatives, you could make foods that have largely the same characteristics as real foods, but have 0 calories because your bodies cannot process them. So I started building paraffin cheese, and paraffin cheese totally works. It has no calories, and it tastes mostly like cheese, and I think that you could get it to be better than cheese on some time scale because it's actually easier to adjust it and play with it and iterate on it than with cultured dairy products. Anyway, I decided against that because it turns out the FDA completely bans this idea. It's completely illegal. And by the way, another thing about petroleum-based food products, you can recycle them when you're done with them. And people don't like that idea either. They don't like the idea of taking what comes out one end and putting it back in the other. And so that was why I decided against that. I said, this is going to be too much of a marketing problem. People aren't going to accept this. And also the FDA literally says doing this is a crime. I would have to convince them to allow the food industry to pivot to making not food with no calories. And so I decided I was going to work in the national security space because that was an area where I do have a lot of technical talent. I can hire people to work in it. I can make a lot of money and do something successful with it. And if I'm able to actually accomplish my goals there, I'll still be very, very happy with myself. So I rambled for a bit there, but you asked how did I decide to start this company? And it was very much a conscious, I have to do something that is going to matter. I have to do something where people say, wow, Palmer did it again.
Yeah.
And I of those 3 things that I came up with, and there's a long list of much worse ideas, if you can believe it. But I'm gonna get to those someday. I'll solve obesity someday, and I'll save everybody from private prison someday. But I can't do everything at once. That is one thing. I'm on a tangent now. Elon Musk is able to run multiple companies at the same time. I cannot. It's not possible. I will never do it.
Well, I think that what you're saying is actually really interesting and really helpful for entrepreneurs kind of starting out, or even those who are maybe looking at their second or third venture,
Yep.
because I think it feels like, well, you had Oculus, so of course your next venture would be an immediate, obvious answer to you, or you would know exactly what
Yep.
to do. And so hearing that you had, sort of all of these ideas and you had to funnel it through, and you did a great deal of research before really picking one.
That's right.
I mean, I think that's not maybe what people would assume.
Well, a lot of people assume that you just do what you love and then it's going to turn out great. And that did work out for Oculus. I did what I loved and I ignored the likely financial consequences and it turned out great for me. But that's not how the real world works. Mm-hmm. In the real world, if you start a business in an area where nobody has ever succeeded, ever, you're probably going to fail. And that's just a statistical outcome that you can't deny. And so when kids will ask me, hey, what can I do? And they really expect me to say, follow your dreams, do what you want, it'll all work out. And I can't tell them that because that's not the truth. And it's actually even the same with the defense space. People say, Palmer, you're working in the defense space. I want to start a defense company. I'm a young person. I want to build a successful defense company. How could I get started? My answer to them is usually a bit of a reality check. I say, guess what? In the last 35 years, there's only 2 companies other than mine that are worth over $1 billion in the defense space. Palantir, SpaceX. Both of them were founded by billionaires. I'm the 3rd one. So there's a pattern here. You make billions of dollars doing something else, and then you start a successful defense company because America's defense machinery is so broken that the only way to be successful is to already have billions of dollars, which is wrong and not the way our country should work. But I say, okay, so with that in mind, you have billions of dollars? And no, of course they don't, because they're just a college student. And I say, well, look, wait, when you sell your company for billions of dollars, then you should start a defense company. But until then, you would have to bet that in modern history, the last 35-ish years, you're going to be the first person to build a defense business of any meaningful size, bootstrapping it yourself. And you can take that bet, but you're going to fail. I mean, there's been thousands of people who've tried this, maybe tens of thousands. And would you rather do that, or would you rather say, you know what, I'm going to pick an area where I'm confident that if I do well, I actually can make a difference and I can make something of size and substance and scale. And then you can go tilt at windmills later. After you've made a little bit of money, go tilt at all the windmills you want.
Yeah.
But first, do something that even if it's not your top passion, your top priority, you should be willing to do things that you think are going to make money. And I think this is not advice that young people get enough. I think we are doing them a huge misservice and disservice by telling them these lies. Like, be a YouTuber if that's what you want to do, or be a professional video game streamer. Go out and be a musician. Like, it's fine if we say, look, I'll frame this, go do what you want, as long as you recognize you're probably going to fail. But when we really rob these kids of the best years of their life by telling them that they have any real statistical probability of success. And this is, by the way, one of my problems with film school. No offense. I mean, like, it'd be great if they were just like, welcome to film school. You're all from wealthy families and you're gonna have a lot of fun. Like, that would be, I would love that framing. But instead, there's this, they actually make people think that they are likely to go and succeed from there. And the numbers are not, they don't back it up. In fact, if you want to be in film, going to film school is not necessarily actually the best path. There's a lot of examples of that.
Earmuffs, Nepal. So.
It's loud and clear.
So you have this, you've figured out your next venture and you're here in it. What is the culture? What is the culture? What do you bring from Oculus? How do you make sure that you're full of true believers again?
Sure.
And also, I think separately, my next question is going to be, I love how you share your wealth of knowledge. How are you sharing this with your employees? How are you getting all of what you know and kind of your advice and worldview out?
Whew, that's interesting. So I'm honest with my employees. I don't lie to them. This is a very novel concept. My experience is that a lot of companies, especially as they get larger, they have a public communications team, and then they often have a sort of internal communications team, which is really just how do we spin ourselves not just to the people on the outside, but the people on the inside. And I think that's a terrible idea. People on the inside need to understand what they're dealing with, even when it's bad, because they're the ones that you're relying on to fix it. Yep. And so the only way you would ever want to lie or mislead your own people is if you think you're going to fix it all on your own by tricking them into doing the right thing instead of relying on everybody to come up with ideas on how to fix things. So I think we have a very honest culture, and that means being brutally honest when things are working, when they're not working, about why that is. I think we do have a pretty good culture of true believers. My company is doing well. Like, we've raised quite a bit of money. We're the third most successful defense company in the last 35 years, so we're doing pretty good on that side of things.
Yeah.
That said, most of the people who work for me, they have plenty of other options. They could be starting their own company. They could be working at a big tech megacorp. Sure. They could be working at their friend's startup. A lot of them are independently wealthy from other previous ventures and could be doing nothing at all. And so a lot of the people that are at Anduril are here because they believe that it is important for the United States to have a strong military. They don't want China or Russia to achieve technological supremacy over the United States. And so we have a lot of these true believers who are here, not because they think that we are the best statistical outcome from a financial perspective, not because they have no other options, but because they really believe in our mission and they believe in the products that we're building for the customers that we're building them for. And I'd say that's like the most dominant part of our culture. Also, about a little less than a third of our company is U.S. service veterans. And so I'd say that's also a real culture definer for us.
Yeah.
And it keeps everyone grounded too. It's when you're an engineer, it's very easy to just do the thing that is elegant from an engineering perspective. But we have a lot of guys who have actually been in combat. They've been in tough decision-making situations, and they understand that it's important sometimes to get things out into the field before they're perfect, before they're polished, before the engineer can say, I'm truly proud of this. Because if you have a thing that could save someone's life or that could save an enormous amount of money, it's better to get it out before you're happy with it than to just keep working on it for another 6 months saying, oh, it's not perfect, I need to keep working on it, At some point you have to say, no, it doesn't matter if you're happy with it. It only matters if our customers are going to get a lot of utility out of it. Yeah. And that is, I think, something that's pretty unique. I guess the one other thing that has been interesting for Anduril compared to Oculus is that I learned something very early on that we've kind of applied across our whole company. When I started Oculus, I thought I was really good at everything, and I was. But I was only the best at a lot of things in our company because I had been negligent in my hiring process. So for a while, I was the best optical engineer in the company, by far. But I realized at some point that was not something to be proud of. That was a failure. I had failed my company. I had failed my investors by making myself a critical dependency for any of our products. And the reality is I'm actually not a very good optical engineer. I was just the best in Oculus. And so whether it's doing electrical layout or mechanical design or optical engineering or you're doing the financials, doing HR, doing any of this stuff, you have to make your goal this idea that you're going to make yourself obsolete, even at the things you like doing. And like, everyone wants to make themselves obsolete at things they hate doing. I mean, people love to hire the guy who's going to help them manage their schedule. They love to hire the person who is going to handle talking to the press. People love that. But nobody likes to hire the guy who's going to do the thing that you like doing. And that was really tough for me at Oculus because I had to give up doing. I realized that I was basically playing house. I was sitting around doing things that way better people could be doing faster, more effectively. And that helps me, that helps my investors, it helps my customers, it helps my employees. And so that was really tough for me at Oculus to let go of those things. At Anduril, I came in from the beginning. I said, guess what, guys? I am useless. You all need to be way better than me or we're going to be screwed. And I think that that's actually been a way healthier mindset. And I give my managers the same mindset. I say, hey, your job is not to do things. It is to get them done in the best way possible. If that means you do it, then you need to do it. You don't get to pass the buck. If that means that somebody else needs to get hired to do it, that's what you need to do. And even if you like doing it, like this also often ends up with a situation where, I started a tech company because I love technology, and I don't get to work on technology anymore. I get to work on bullshit. But that's actually exactly where you should be when you start with these companies. And I tell young people this all the time, like, I love programming, so I want to start a software company. I said, no, you don't. Go work for somebody else. If you like programming, you really love programming, go work for someone else who will pay you to be a programmer. Don't go and become this guy who's actually going to be making brutal hiring and firing decisions around people's performance. And you're going to be dealing with government compliance offices. And you're going to be dealing with marketing and talking to the rest. None of that has anything to do with programming. Yeah. And this is another thing where I think we mislead people into thinking that the best way to pursue their dreams is always to just do everything themselves. Like, no, do the thing that you like doing if you're an employee of someone else. But if you're working for other people and they're dependent on you, you have to toss that out the window. So it doesn't matter what I like doing. I need to do the thing that I'm good at. And so that's the story of how I became a lobbyist.
So I have two questions that are unrelated, but I want to say them both before I forget them.
Far away.
The first one is dovetailing off of your culture of honesty, kind of this radical honesty. There's a lot of research coming out that the highest performing teams have a very high level of psychological safety, right? They can show as who they are. They can say what they need to say.
Yep.
So as a leader, how do you not only implement the honesty going that way, but also coming back and accepting that and kind of being in that rumble with them? And then my second question is, I'm not sure what you're at liberty to discuss, but I would love to know a project that you are specifically proud of at Anduril and that you're at liberty to say. I'm not sure how much you can share, but something that you're very excited about there.
So I guess working backwards, we're working on a lot of things. I'd say only about a third of the things that our company works on are public. And that's actually very frustrating for me. I like to talk about everything. But we make a lot of things. We make tactical drone systems. We make surveillance systems that are securing U.S. military bases here in the U.S. and all over the world. Do a lot of work with the U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Air Force. Do a lot of work with partners like the UK Ministry of Defence, where we've done a lot with the UK Royal Marines, specifically their Future Commando Force. We build a lot of artificial intelligence software that not only powers our systems, but also other systems. So we've integrated our AI with dozens of military assets, from manned fighters to naval destroyers to hypervelocity gun system prototypes being built by other large defense companies. And so we're doing a lot of really cool stuff. Something that I'm most proud of right now is we're working on building a counter drone system that it's not just one thing, it's actually a whole bunch of things that work together, but it's basically a system that can detect an enemy drone if it's coming for a military base. We can triangulate the location of where the operator is and send our own drone to go and track them. So it's easy to blow up drones, but you really want to find the guy who's operating them, because those are harder for the bad guys to replace. So basically we can detect the enemy drone, figure out where the operator of it is, jam the GPS, jam the communications, and then launch a kinetic interceptor that goes out and knocks their drone out of the sky. And it does this all basically in a totally automated fashion. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of people coordinating all of this. It's just one guy sees the alert and he pushes one button, and then this all goes into motion. And we have a range of a few miles around each base that we're deployed at. So we're able to basically build a force field around these things and make it impossible to have small aircraft either attacking them or even surveilling them. A lot of people don't understand that surveillance can be even more deadly than kinetic attacks at a strategic level. So if you're an adversary, what's more important? To deliver an explosive payload into a military base, or to understand the turnaround time of a particular aircraft to come in, get refueled, and take off again. A lot of times, we'd much rather have the first than the latter. And so even just what would seem harmless, just people flying these drones, just watching what's going on, maybe in an instant you'd say, well, what's sensitive about watching an airplane land and take off? But if you watch it 100 times, now you have a probabilistic basis to do your strategic planning and saying, hey, you know what, we know that we know exactly how long it takes for them to perform this operation. We know exactly how long it takes for them to do that. We know how often they screw up, and we know what it looks like when they're screwing up so that we can jump on that opportunity at the right time. So people often don't understand the small drone surveillance threat and how having pervasive small drone surveillance can be a huge deal. So you just need to knock all the drones out of the sky anywhere close to anything you care about if you want to keep it a secret. So that's one of the things we're working on. We're also working on some stuff that's gonna go after much faster, much bigger aircraft, and so that's pretty exciting.
Oh.
And then, so what was that first question that you asked?
The first question was more back to the culture piece. You were talking about honesty.
Oh, honesty in the other direction.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's really tough. People are not honest. I think that's probably the number one thing. I mean, I just can't play myself. Like if I am the boss, and people know that I'm measuring their employment to some degree, they're going to manage information flow in my direction. And I have to accept that and be aware of that. People are very rarely, like you can say, how do you get your employees to be honest when it was them that screwed up and ruined tons of money and they were being an idiot? It's easy when it's a learning moment. Like what if they were actually being stupid and violating policy in the process? It's like, how do you get them to come to you? And the answer is they will not. And you just have to accept it. But I think that one thing that you can do to mitigate that is to try to work on the ground with people to the greatest extent that you can.
Yeah.
I'd say most of my teams are pretty honest with me, and they may not always be willing to say when they're screwing up, but certainly they'll tell me when I'm screwing up.
Okay.
And that's because I've made clear to them, like I think that you kind of have to align incentives. There's no amount of just lecturing someone that is going to cause them to change their values. But if you say like, hey, I'm going to lay out a very clear structure here where look at all these past examples of when I had a bad idea or when I was running something poorly and then someone pointed out how we could improve and then I actually changed and adopted that and did that. When people see that happening consistently, they're a lot more likely to speak up when you're screwing up because they've seen it before. They've seen it happen over and over again. On the flip side of that, if you screw that up even one time, that's the only time anyone's ever going to remember. You know, it's this, people love to remember the screw ups. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to never ever screw up. And that's not easy, but I endeavor to do it. And the good news is if you just say, look, I'm never going to delude myself. I'm going to try to be better when I'm doing dumb things. Then that's important. And sometimes, even when I think that something is dumb, if I have 5 people that are telling me that I'm the dumb one, sometimes you have to say, okay, I'm just going to have to trust you. I did hire you for this purpose after all. Yeah. And more often than not, the experts that I hired to be the experts are more right than I am. And that's a valuable learning experience for me too.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think we'll open it up for some Q&A. So if you were to, I'm sure you get this question all the time. So I'm going to try to give it to you in a way that's new.
All right.
What would be your number one choice, your most favorite area to be disrupted next? So not the one that you think is most likely, but what area outside of the 2 you mentioned for the companies you were looking at starting, what would be your most favorite area you'd love to see disrupted?
I never think of these things from the perspective of, it doesn't matter whether it's likely or not. So give me a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is if workability is no limit, then world peace. Let's do it. Let's get some world peace. But almost everything I do, I'd say I'm not trying to blow your question away, but I am saying generally everything I think about is in the context of how practical is this, how possible is this, and therefore should I put time and effort into it. I mean, if I really got to blow that away and it isn't world peace or some other Miss Universe answer, I think it'd probably be nuclear power. Everyone needs to get over nuclear waste, and we need nuclear power everywhere, all the time, everywhere. It is so good, and the waste just doesn't matter. Nuclear waste is so easy to manage compared to every other problem. And just so you know, some people care about this because they care about carbon emissions, they care about the environment. Those people have a great argument in that context. Like fossil fuels are much, much worse at putting carbon dioxide out than nuclear. I'm actually not worried about climate change, not because it's not happening, but because I think man will bend nature to his will whenever he desires. Like I think we can chill the climate or heat the climate basically at will if that's what we want to do. There's lots of ways to do it. They're not popular, but geoengineering and terraforming are not that hard. We understand it really well. We don't understand all the consequences, but we can definitely make the world hotter or colder. That part is not in question. I mean, you see people talking seriously about terraforming Mars. If you can terraform Mars, you can definitely shift the Earth a few degrees one way or the other with carbon dumps or with solar blockers or even just making a little bit more clouds out in the Pacific. But I'd say nuclear power, because nuclear power is all on its own. If we had it at scale, and if we had lots of it, we could actually achieve the 1950s, 1960s dream of power that is too cheap to meter. Power that is too cheap to meter would be so incredibly valuable for our country. There's so many different industrial processes that are energy intensive. There's a lot of things where we're losing to China and losing to Russia because energy is expensive. If we could make our energy so cheap that we're not even metering it, that is how you get steel to roar back in the US. That's how you get aluminum to roar back in the US. That's how you get cement to come back in the US. That's how you get a lot of these manufacturing industries to be much more cost competitive in the United States. So if I could just pick one thing, wave my magic wand and we had it, I'd say nuclear everywhere, nuclear everything. And then the waste is not that hard to deal with. We could just build Death Mountain out in the middle of the desert and we'll bury it a mile underground. It'll be totally fine. And people are like, oh, but what if people walk over it in 1,000 years? Like, you know what? After a few people walk over it and they come across it and they die, they'll figure out that it's bad news too. And they're like, oh, but you really would kill that guy? It's like, well, we lose guys in coal-fired power plants every single day. So I'm worried about the guy who's dying today, not the guy who's going to die 1,000 years from now slowly of cancer. Anyway, maybe that's too cold, but that's my view and I'm sticking to it.
Great answer. Okay, can I ask one more question? Are we okay? All right, Grazie Dio, what we do is we create best for the world leaders. That's our thing. So if you could maybe in one sentence, one paragraph say what the leaders need for tomorrow, if you could build a perfect tomorrow leader,
oh man,
what is that?
A perfect tomorrow leader would completely ignore what their preferred political allies think is the right thing to do, and they would ignore what the established experts tell them what to do, and they would say, you know what? I am going to figure out on, I don't want to say on your own, because actually figuring things out on your own is usually a bad idea if you're not an expert. But there's a difference between figuring things out in the framework that somebody else has built and saying, I'm going to go out myself, I'm going to get a bunch of experts together, they're going to tell me what the best thing to do is outside of their existing framework. Like, here's an example, because what I'm saying right now is very general, and anyone can say things that everyone agrees with, but it's the same as saying nothing. So specifically, if you talk to a lot of scientists, people say, listen to the scientists. Well, there's a big difference between what a scientist, especially an academic, will say in private and what they will say in a published journal. Whether it's about their level of confidence or because they know that if they say this certain thing, it's going to be very unpopular with their cohorts, it's going to be very unpopular for getting more funding. Actually, nuclear power is a great example. There's a lot of people who will say positive things about nuclear privately, but they would never say them in a public setting because it will alienate their political allies who are all hippies that hate nuclear power. It will alienate their colleagues who think that terraforming, this is a real debate. They'll say, is it even ethical to publish studies on things like terraforming and geoengineering, given that it creates a relief valve potentially for current emissions? Could it be that by creating a solution, we make the problem worse? And there's people who won't publish information because they know that enough people in their field will think ill of them, that they know it will ruin their careers, ruin their possibilities of grants. So I'd say, like, what do leaders of today, of tomorrow need to do? They need to be willing to look at the world and say, okay, I'm going to talk to the experts directly, and I'm going to synthesize what the right path based on that is, not on what it is within the framework that they've established. And if you can do that one thing, you're going to make way better decisions than all the other guys who are working off the publicly available version, which is inevitably going to be distorted. And if you can be the guy working with the ground truth data from the people who know what they're talking about, and everyone else is working with this bizarre, distorted version that is designed to appeal to everybody all at once and upset nobody, especially your friends, then you're gonna do great things as a leader.